I'll call this meeting to order. Chair Erpenbach will not be with us this week. She was called out of town. So I will be chairing the meeting this afternoon. Just a couple of things to bring to your attention on this evening's agenda. We are pulling out the Vaults Retail Liquor License renewal and the Mercados Package Liquor License renewal for further discussion. They will be pulled out of the consent agenda so that we can have discussion over those two renewals during the regular agenda meeting. And then also on December 18th at 5:30, we've got a pretty full day on December 18th, but at 5:30 that afternoon we will have a joint Lincoln County city meeting right here in Carnegie. So that'll be on December 18th. With that, is there any other City Council open discussion items? Kermit?
Very shortly, from what I understand, we're going to have the Snowgate petition submitted to the city clerk's office. And according to state law, once the signatures have been validated, then the city council has 10 days to go ahead and call a special election. And that's what happened with the petitions dealing with Drake Springs Pool a number of years ago. We had them submitted, and then the city council within 10 days called for a special election. Despite the fact that most of the city council members were against the petition, they did call a special election. And I think the primary reason why they did that was because they wanted to respect the wishes of the citizens who signed that petition. And so, in that vein, I would hope that we would do the same thing when it comes to these petitions, when they are submitted and validated. Now, because we have to do this within such a short time, 10 days, I was hoping that to fully understand the issues involved, that maybe we could have David and we could have Lori give us a briefing as to all the ramifications of this. Possibly next informational.
I think we can arrange that.
Okay.
Councilor Staggers will make sure during the discussion point at the next information meeting,
Okay.
4 o'clock meeting, that we'll ask the city attorney for some information.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Okay. Any other questions? Greg? Councilor Jameson.
If I could, I was asking Dave Fifley to give us maybe a little tune-up on the issue of our authorities as a council on the pending liquor license issues coming forward. If we could have Dave.
Sure. Dave, please.
Thank you. Yeah, tonight, as you mentioned, Councilor Jameson, there's going to be 3 different alcohol licenses that are going to be pulled and placed on the regular agenda. 2 of them are involving a renewal of an existing license, and 1 of them is an application for a new license. For the 2 existing licenses, since this is renewal time, as a local governing body, you have the discretion to grant or deny those, and the 2 factors you can look at are suitable person, that being the applicant, and suitable location, being where the alcohol is to be served. And that, again, you have full discretion on that issue since it's renewal time. On the granting or denial of the new application, the same 2 factors would also apply. For your information tonight, we will have members of the police department here that can answer your questions regarding any calls to each of those particular premises, and I'm sure some of the neighbors may also be here regarding any issues for the neighborhoods for those 3 locations.
Councilor Jameson? Sufficient?
Well, I'll open it up to the rest of the guys if there's further questions. We've had some discussion already, so I just thought it'd be the benefit for the rest of us too.
Okay.
So,
Councilor Rothman, please.
Yes, to David. Some of these liquor licenses have conditional use permits with them, and some of them do not. The ones that have conditional use permits, we're so restricted on what we can do and what we can't do on that. Are there any Is there anything that tells us that we can or cannot limit the conditional use permit once it's given as a city? Maybe you can answer that, Mike, or Jeff. Excuse me.
The conditional use, Mike Cooper, Planning and Building Services. The conditional use process is part of the zoning ordinance that talks about land use. And so when a conditional use permit is being considered, what we're looking at is that an appropriate use of that property for the sale of alcohol. And, you know, we've gone around over the years with our standards that we have within that ordinance. Is there an undue concentration? Is it close to other neighborhoods that would be of concern? And so within the ordinance, there are standards that if you meet those standards, then the land use approval would go forward. So a revocation of a conditional use permit would be if you're not in compliance with a condition or other requirements of the city zoning ordinance. And we've always kind of kept that separate, the land use separate from the actual alcohol license.
Understand.
But yeah, that's the question that you're
Could you
raising.
bring those back this afternoon or tonight when we're there and let us know what those are, or email them to us before tonight?
Okay.
What those conditions are?
If any, yes, we'll do that.
Are you referring to those three in
Those,
particular?
No, not those three. Yeah, if there are, number one, if there are conditional use permits on those three.
just in
and
general what the standards are.
just generally what the
okay.
standards are for the conditional use permit attached to the piece of property where they're granted a liquor license.
Okay, for that use. Okay,
Yeah,
for the
that
sale of
use.
alcohol.
For the sale of alcohol.
Okay.
Thank you.
Can I add? Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd also note, Councilor Rolfing, that our state Supreme Court has specifically held, and I'm quoting, suitability of location remains a factor regardless of how many times an applicant has received approval in the past at the same location. We will not presume that a location, though at one time declared suitable for the sale of alcohol, will always remain so. So I think you have a lot of discretion in that regard, even though at one time it may have been approved.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Good. Councilor Jameson, please.
If I could, Councilor Anderson earlier tonight, when we were discussing this, brought up a very good point about, in particular, the vault, about who was there first. And I think Coconut Joe's was there first, and then the vault. But the other businesses that have developed around it knew what they had there before they came and built their businesses there. Now, they aren't, as you've all seen the letters, they're not very impressed with their neighbors. But it brings up a very good question. I mean, about who is, does it matter who was there first? Does it matter only about what's happening today? Very good discussion. I mean, the vault's in my district, and I've heard a lot from these neighbors, and I visited the vault during one of these events that they were complaining about, and I've had firsthand experience. So it's just a little more sensitive to me, but I just hope to have a full discussion this evening and wanted to talk today just at the 4 o'clock to help us tune up and be ready for that.
We have, and these are being moved, you know, so we can have the discussion on them. And it's my understanding representatives from from all three of these companies will be here to address any concerns that we have. Is there anything else on this?
No,
Rex?
not on this.
Okay. Rex, did you have another issue?
Just wanted to remind everybody that there will be a land use committee meeting following this meeting, and we have two fairly important items on the agenda, and you've all got those on your agendas on the back side of this agenda for right now for the informational, and I urge you to stick around for that. Thank you.
Thank you. Anything else for open discussion? If not, we'll move on to the presentation, and we'll turn it over to Mike Cooper, Director of Planning and Building Services.
Good afternoon, council members. I'm joined today by representatives not only of planning but also Public Works as well as Parks and Recreation. We put together this presentation as a result of your discussions about the CIP process, how it's worked in the past, how it might work in the future, what should the role of the council be, how do these projects get prioritized. So as we had those discussions, one of the things that I commented on was maybe it would be good to have kind of an overview for the council of development issues in terms of how we determine growth areas, infrastructure, recreation facilities, and so forth to address those growth areas. So this is an attempt to put that education piece together. And as we go through it, if you have any questions, again, we have a number of resource people here today. We've divided up into three pieces. The first part is kind of an overview of some of the demographics of growth and giving you an idea of where some of the growth impacts are anticipated. The second part is an overview of some of the main projects that are in the current 5-year capital program. And we've broken it out by different segments of the city, just to kind of give you a visual idea of what's in the plan now. And then the last part is looking beyond the current capital program priorities, some of the other development impacts that we've discussed at the staff level or that we're studying in more detail, just to kind of give you a little idea of maybe some things that you can think about as well as we move forward into the next CIP process. So as we start out, just to kind of give you a sense of our population growth, again, each 10 years we do the census. The 2010 census was about a 25% increase from the year 2000. And each year we do our own population estimate each January based on building permit data and other factors. At the beginning of this year, we estimated the city population to be about 156,300. And so we'll do another city population estimate here in another couple of months or so. But our 2020 projection for the City of Sioux Falls is in that 177,500 range. And when you think about adding 3,000 to 4,000 people per year, that's kind of the trend that we've been seeing in most years. Along with that is the housing unit construction. And you can see again, we've gone back to 1990, 2000, 2010. So far this year, we're at about 1,700 total new housing units that have been permitted. That 1,700 includes single-family, townhomes, and apartments. And again, you can kind of see the projection by the year 2020 of a total of 80,000 housing units. So as we look at those demographics, those metrics, it kind of helps us understand what is anticipated from year to year. Another tool that we use to kind of keep track of where the development impacts are anticipated is what we call our approved residential development map. And this is one that we update each year. So we haven't done the 2012 map yet, obviously, because we're still into the year. But if you look at this map, the areas that are in yellow are approved residential subdivisions. And for each one of those, we have the name of the developer, the number of acres, and then the projected number of single-family housing units, apartment housing units, or townhomes, whatever the case might be. And so when those developments are approved through the subdivision plan, which those do come to the City Council for final approval, then we can map out, again, what's anticipated within those development areas. And that's a way that we can kind of track how much land area has been approved for residential construction compared to how much land area is consumed on an annual basis. And we have a lot more detail that's not shown on this chart for each one of those yellow areas. But what we've talked about in most cases is that we have at least a 5 to 7 year supply of approved residential development land based on the current market trends and market demand for housing. And we know that that can fluctuate as the city begins to see more development. But this shows that we have a very good supply right now of development land. So in addition to knowing where the development has been approved, what type of development in terms of residential, that's also going to help us determine our infrastructure needs whether it's utilities or street improvements, or other city facilities such as fire stations, libraries, parks, and other open space requirements. So that's just a good tool that we can use internally for keeping track of where those growth impacts are anticipated over the next few years. Then you look at, we also track where the actual building permits are approved each year. And this is through GIS. So each of those red dots for this year shows where a building permit has been approved from January through the end of October. And it gives you an idea, too, of where the most development impact is. Southeast, South Central, West Side have traditionally been the highest rates of growth for residential construction. We're starting to see a little bit more trend up in the Northwest area, and we think that that's going to continue even more in the next 3 to 5 years. And we're happy to see that even in the central area that we're seeing some limited new residential construction. So again, this is a tool that we can use to track where the demand for homes is occurring and what impact that's going to have on requests for services to those areas. In most cases, by the time a building permit is approved, there either already are services in place or those services are in the stages of being completed by the time the house is open for occupancy, or other buildings adjacent to these areas. So then we wanted to explain to you a little bit more about how we, at the staff level, work through our growth management plan, which is the SHAPE 2035 plan, in terms of prioritizing capital projects. And this would be in most cases where there are development impact projects as opposed to replacement or repair type projects. But we've developed over the years a system of tiers. And so this shows you the tier 1, 2, and 3 in the different color codes. Tier 1, which is in the blue, is the area that we would anticipate needing to provide services within a 5-year period approximately. Tier 2 would be the next 5 years, and then Tier 3 would be beyond the 10, 15, and maybe getting out into the 20-year timeline. So our SHAPE 2035 goes out 25 years, obviously, and that's another way that we can help do two things. It helps us better manage our capital priorities and our requests for funds, but it also helps the development community know where the services or where the infrastructure is going to be available in terms of the timeline. So it's just a way of helping to manage a little bit more the growth with the need and the demand and the assurance of those services that go with it. So as I go through some of these discussions in more detail, just keep in mind that the blue is Tier 1, and so that's the 5-year approximately timeline that we're working with. The other part of the SHAPE 2035 plan is the land use plan, which is more of a conceptual idea of looking at where the major streets are going to be and where some of the major employment centers are going to be, the large red areas, such as downtown, on the east side, Dolly Farm Village. The southwest is on 41st Street, the mall area. Down by Interstate 29 and 85th Street is another future major employment, a regional employment center. And then the fifth one is up in the northwest area, east of Marion Road and north of 60th Street North. And then at major street intersections, we have different sub-regionals, community, and then neighborhood employment centers. So again, this is a conceptual land use plan that helps us determine more so the non-residential, whoops, I'm sorry for the feedback there, more so the non-residential land uses and how those tie in with other future city facilities. Along with the land use, we also have a tier map for sanitary sewer. And again, it's divided into the different basins. So that's the same color scheme of the blue, green, and tan. And we have another one for public facilities, which would be the schools, the parks, the fire stations, the libraries. And also our transportation projects. So that's a real quick overview of how we at the staff level, again, try to manage in looking at the development impacts on a 5-year timeline and trying to determine what the request will be for everything from arterial streets, water, sewer, storm drainage, parks, fire stations, and so forth. So that's kind of the big picture concept of what we do in terms of capital improvement planning. The second part of this is walking through with you kind of a refresher of what's currently in the 5-year plan. And we've, again, broken it out by geographical areas just to kind of help you understand visually where everything is. I'm not going to go through all these in a lot of detail because there's a lot of detail about some of these that I'm not totally familiar with, but these are in the current 5-year program. So in this case, we would have sanitary sewer project up in the northwest. There's 2 areas that are in the 5-year plan that are going to serve future growth areas. And so these would be typically looking at acquiring property for a BMP or doing some other type of major storm, I shouldn't say a BMP, looking at, I got to remember what I'm talking about, sanitary sewer. In this case, the sanitary sewer would be looking at serving some new basins. Based on our 2035 plan, we have these growth areas divided up into basins and sub-basins. And so we would be looking at serving new basins or sub-basins with extension of our sanitary sewer infrastructure. And then we would also have other smaller projects where we're doing possible replacement or expansion of existing pipe. So that's the main type of sanitary sewer projects that you would see in the current capital program. The water, again, it can vary from neighborhood water main replacement. In this case, we're looking at utility maintenance shop addition and then other reservoir improvements. And those are kind of scattered around. Roads, every one of our growth areas has some significant road projects. You can see that we have the Russell Street identified there in the middle, which is a 2013-2014 project. Kiwanis Avenue, Madison Street, Benson Road, a portion of 60th Street North, Ellis Road. And so again, those are all current transportation projects that we've identified and that you have approved in the current 5-year program for the Northwest area. Storm drainage can be, again, I was talking about channel improvements or adding detention ponds. We also have projects that we work on for sump pump collection system enhancements. And then finally, we have the public facilities, which are identified, primarily the city park projects. And these can be new neighborhood parks. They can be upgrading of existing parks. And you can see the variety of those locations around that northwest area. Moving to the southwest, the same thing with our sanitary sewer. We have another basin that we've identified just on the east side of Interstate 90, south of Interstate 229, which will provide better service to that southwest growth area. We have our Sioux River South Interceptor Phase 2, which you can just see up at the upper, or in the middle right-hand corner of this map. And then there's other pipe replacement and expansion projects that we'd be looking at. Water main, again, a lot of that west side is looking at neighborhood water main replacement. We might do some of those. And the road projects, you can see Marion Road is on there. Tallgrass Avenue, 85th Street, and then going west of Interstate 29 up on Sundowner Avenue. A lot of street projects that have been identified and approved in the southwest area. And again, these are over the next 5 to 6 years. And the storm drainage. Public facilities, there's a couple new neighborhood parks that are in the 5-year program that will serve that southwest area. And I'll just remind you again that that red line that's on the outside edge of all these maps is that first Tier 1 boundary. So we're going from southwest to northeast. Did we skip the southeast? No. Okay, all right. I'm sorry, did you have a question?
All the way back to the original red line on that map. But I would just question, but am I colorblind? I don't see a red line. Blue.
It's just the blue. Yeah. Yep.
Yes.
We're just talking Tier 1, blue.
Yes, he was.
Okay, you did a good job.
Actually, it was just making sure everybody was still paying attention.
Yep.
Okay.
All right.
Okay, good.
Okay. Yes, we want to make sure that you're paying attention. Okay. So now we're jumping up to the northeast for sanitary sewer. You can see that we've got a project there going through kind of the middle part of that along the Big Sioux River. And then another basin that we're looking at out by the very east side, north of the Arboretum and Willow Run Golf Course. Water main, some replacement projects, some street improvement projects. The main one that's shown up there would be improving Benson Road east of Interstate 229, and then Cliff Avenue from about 60th Street north going up to about 67th Street north. And then there's some projects closer to the downtown area of 6th Street. Another big project will be redoing the intersection of Sycamore and Arrowhead Parkway, which is the dot kind of there in the middle. Storm drainage. And then the public facilities. Most of these are working on existing parks, making improvements. But there is another neighborhood park showing in the very lower right-hand corner that will serve part of that growth area. Okay, now jumping back down to the southeast with the sanitary sewer. You can see that that large blue area is south of 26th Street and going east towards the Big Sioux River. You can see the 6 Mile Road in there as well. And then you can also see a portion of the Sioux River South Interceptor, which will go west of Minnesota Avenue through Yankton Trail Park. We have a few water projects in the southeast area. And then some major road projects. The big one that we're showing in the middle there is the study that we're currently working on with Southeastern Avenue and 26th Street, east of Interstate 229. On the left-hand side, you can see a proposal for 49th Street, going west of Minnesota Avenue. Improvements to Cliff Avenue down towards 85th Street. The project that was being worked on now is East 57th Street, and then South Dakota 11 or 100, which will continue into next year, going south of 69th Street, which will be part of the South Dakota 100 corridor. And some storm drainage improvements. and the public facilities for the southeast area. A couple things to take a look at there is that we are working with Harrisburg and Brandon Valley on additional school sites, school park sites, and there's another fire station shown in the southeast area, and some additional neighborhood parks beyond that. And then finally in the central area, again, you can see the Sioux River South project down there. And up on North Minnesota Avenue, there's a big project towards Russell. Some water main work scattered around the area. And some of the street projects, a few of these I've kind of already talked about within the other areas. And some storm drainage improvements. And public facilities, again, I think most of these are existing park facilities that we would be upgrading or making improvements to. So that is kind of a quick snapshot of what is in your current capital program. I'm a visual person, so sometimes it's easier to kind of see those visually. And we can put that in a different format if you would like in the future, or if you would like more of a description about those projects, we can do that as well.
Say, Mike, if I might, if you would, I'd like to get a copy of this with a single slide per sheet. It's kind of hard to read when we have two slides.
Yes, we'll do that.
If you could, please.
Okay.
It's good information. Thank you.
We're following the protocol of putting 2 slides per page, but we'll get that to you with 1 slide per page. Yeah, it is a lot easier to read. I agree. And also, if you look at the 2013 to 2017 capital program, within each section there is a map also of the project. So if you go to water reclamation, parks, you can see that there's a map, and that's what we've kind of used to help put this together. So the last part of this presentation would be talking about some citywide development issues that we're talking about, that we're studying, that we're aware of, that may or may not change some of the future priorities as we're looking at the next phase of updating the capital program. And so the first exhibit that I want to show you is our school district and city limits map. This shows you the current city limits overlaid on the school district boundaries. So in the middle, in the white area, is the Sioux Falls School District boundary. On the right side is Brandon Valley, and then you have a small portion of Canton, Harrisburg in the south side, T in the southwest, Lenox, West Central, and Tri-Valley. And you can see that currently portions of the city limits extend into a number of those school districts. And as you know, we currently have 1 school that we've done with Brandon Valley on the east side, the Assam Elementary School. We have 2 Harrisburg schools done. We're currently working on a middle school and an elementary school with Harrisburg on Southwestern Avenue. And as I mentioned earlier, in that southeast area, we're already looking at a site for another Harrisburg school and another Brandon Valley school. And I think those are the main ones. We have the West Maple Street School underway as well with the Sioux Falls School District, which will be a middle school, as well as at least 1 more, maybe 2 more elementary schools. So just wanted you to be aware of this. I know most of you probably are, but it's another kind of unique situation that we deal with in our planning and capital programming priorities. We've also talked to you in the past about annexation. The vast majority of the expansion of the city limits is done by voluntary annexation, where a property owner says, I'm in that Tier 1 area, I know that the city can get services to me within a 5-year period, so I want to annex my property and get it approved for some type of future development. And that's how things typically work. But as we've discussed with you in the past, there are these other pockets of land currently outside the city limits for various reasons, primarily because the property owners have not indicated an interest in having their property annexed, or in some cases they've said they will oppose annexation. And we put together this map and discussed this with you before because in some cases we believe that it's in the city's interest to work with these property owners to come up with a better timeline of when we can bring that property into the city, because it's going to help manage other development around these areas. When you end up with these pockets of land that are not in the city limits, it becomes more difficult in some cases to put in streets or utility improvements. So we're continuing to work on these. We've also put these in priority. The red would be the first wave, the brown the second wave, the yellow the third wave, and so forth. And this is just a very long-term project that we continue to work on with these different properties. But wanted you to be aware that this also has some impact on how we can program. And the one that we're probably dealing the most with now is on the red area out on West 41st Street. There's a portion of property out there that's not in the city limits, and that we are trying to work with them on how we're going to make future street and utility improvements out into that area. So that's just one example. Okay, every year Public Works takes the lead, engineering division, in looking at arterial street improvements, new streets, those kind of things. And they also take the lead in a number of different transportation studies that we undertake throughout the year. And so this is a graphic of some of the transportation improvements that are not in the current capital program that we may or may not be looking at in terms of trying to determine how quickly we can add those into the program. I don't want to leave you the impression today that we're going to come in and request that all of these get added to the program, but we wanted you to be aware of some of these that we're looking at, that we have studied in the past, and that we think are going to improve services to the area and also accommodate future development in some of these outlying areas. And of course, the biggest one that's in the upper right-hand corner would be the continuation of South Dakota 100 going north of Highway 42 up along Powderhouse Road, and then connecting up past Interstate 90. The other part of that would be extending Benson Road across the Big Sioux River and connecting it over to Holly Boulevard, which is on the very west side of Brandon. There's some other major arterial projects that you can see on the map that we've either studied or, again, that we're looking at, what the future traffic impacts are going to be. We typically do a model of our transportation system, projecting current traffic flow and then projecting what the 2035 anticipated traffic flow is going to be based on land use development. And then the other part of that is the future school park facilities. And these can be everything from trail projects, neighborhood park projects. Again, you can see in the southeast corner there, the future school park areas, fire station. Yeah, we just had a staff meeting today, internal meeting with staff, of looking at our bicycle trail plan, and that it's time to update that to kind of take a fresh look at where the next wave of priority should be of trying to connect some of these neighborhood areas to the main bike trail system. So again, what I'm showing you on the map today is not necessarily what we're saying that we need to add into the capital program right away. But it is one of the areas that we do look at as a city staff. Parks and Recreation will typically take the lead on this, and they'll identify where they think some of the future priorities would be. We have a bicycle committee. We have the Park and Recreation committees, the Park and Recreation Board. And so all of that is a process that we can use to vet through some of these proposed improvements or priorities or requests that will eventually come to the City Council for a recommendation. Is that the last one? Okay, that's again, a very, very quick overview of some of the development impacts, how we use the planning process internally, and then just kind of giving you a heads up on some of the other outlying or internal areas that we're taking a look at that we'll continue to watch as we move forward into the future. I'm sure I missed some of the details, but the folks behind me can also help address any questions that you might have.
Are there any questions for Mr. Cooper?
And we will get this to you on a bigger format so that you can look at it in more detail.
Thanks a lot, Mike. Appreciate it. Kermit, please.
Yes. Mike, in taking a look at some of these maps, am I correct that some of these projects are outside the city limits of Sioux Falls right now?
Probably some of them, yes.
I guess, is there any concern about doing that without having the area already annexed?
Yeah, what we would do is we would be doing these projects as the property is annexed. So again, we're looking in anticipation.
Because I'm looking down here at Tallgrass
Yes.
and 85th, and
Right.
those are out. Those parts are outside the city. So
Actually, that is in the city limits.
part of it is, part
Yes.
of it isn't. Yeah.
Yep. But the infrastructure projects that we would be doing are land that's either in the city or anticipated to be in the city limits.
So we're anticipating that 85th and also that part of Tallgrass that's outside of the city limits right now, within 5 years will be annexed.
That's what we're believing, yes. Mhm.
Any other questions for Director Cooper? Councilor Jameson.
Mike, thank you. I'm a visual person as well, and I need all the pictures I can get.
Yeah.
This is part of a discussion we've had in the fiscal committee, trying to understand maybe and appreciate what the administration does and how they go through their process of building the CIP and developing it. On the other side as well, if the council wants to become more involved in developing the CIP, how would they do that? And so we've been struggling as a committee on formulating a plan to do that. So I'll just kind of ask you out in front of God and everybody, what would you recommend to the council if they wanted to get more involved in developing a CIP, the vision for the future of the city based on development of the CIP? How would you recommend we get involved?
Well, probably one way would be to utilize your committee structure, that as we go through some of our preliminary analysis and review, that we could bring some of that information to, whether it's public services or land use. That might be one suggestion.
So while you're developing it versus after you've developed it and printed the book and give it to us.
And say thank you for your support.
Right, and that's one of the things we were trying to, very well bluntly stated, was not just come and ask for our rubber stamp. Somehow give us some ownership to this process, and that's what we were after, some ownership in it.
And then part of the purpose of today, and I know I've gone through this extremely fast, but part of the purpose of today is to show you some of those areas that we're looking at. But if you see another area, or if there's a constituency out there that has asked you about a certain street project or a development area, then you can relay that information to us, and then we can be aware of that as well. So I think it can work both ways.
If I could, one of the other thoughts I was having while I was listening, oftentimes we talk about this 30,000 or 10,000 foot level view of certain things because if we get tied up in the weeds, we kind of lose track of the forest, so to speak. And for me, what I use are some of the percentages that we allocate for different departments. Like, for instance, if the highways and streets, the percent of the total budget, I see on a graph the percent of the budget continuously drops. That's kind of a red flag over the past year, some kind of a trending that occurs, the amount of money we spend on parks. If the amount of dollars may increase each year, but the percentage of budget doesn't. So it may appear as though we're still investing more in parks or something, but in comparison to the total budget, we're actually doing less. And I see that as a tool for myself. I don't know if it's beneficial for the rest of the council or what they use to evaluate the future of the CIP, but today's presentation was all part of that discussion about what do the council want, what does the council want, and what tools do they need, and if they want them, how do we get them? Am I right? I mean,
If I might, I think what's really challenging is that we see consuls change as we go with years, and consulars come and go, and to get involved where a staff person may have been here for a number of years working on this,
It shows.
I think it is challenging on the part of us. When you sit here and you look at the approved residential developments, for example, I mean, for me to sit here and say, well, I want a residential development over here, basically, I guess it's based on the services, as you stated, the infrastructure services that you're able to provide is what determines where we're going to be able to put these residential areas. And those demands are set by the developers that are coming in asking to develop. I'm under that assumption, correct me if I'm wrong, Mike.
That's correct, yes.
Do you designate an area and then you say, well, we want residential development here? Or is that kind of based on the direction that development is taking place right now?
It's both, Councilor. We identify through our SHAPE 2035 where the growth areas can accommodate, whether it's residential or non-residential. And so again, those tier maps that I confused everybody about, this is where we can provide services within a 5-year period. So you, as a developer, can say, okay, I'm going to start looking at a project within that tier 1 area, and I want to go through and get it approved. And so back to the residential, if you did an overlay of the approved residential development map, you would see all of that obviously is within that tier 1 area.
So to follow up with one more question here then, so if you look at where the growth management plan, those colors that you have there, and you've identified,
Right.
5 years or whatever years you go out into the future, are those also based partially on revenue also, or income coming into the city, or is it based on just on the structure?
It's based on a projection of demand for growth. It's based on the population growth, the amount of land area to serve that population growth of what we anticipate. That's how we've determined those.
To me, it makes sense, Mike, Greg, I think as you develop and you look at these other areas, if you involve the committees, I think, in some of the discussion on how you've reached the need to move into the areas, why the annexation is taking place, so that we can better understand possibly, why we're going into those directions instead of having discussions after the fact and saying, I just don't understand why you're doing this. If we are involved partially in the presentation, whether it's done on an annual basis or whatever that might be prior to the development of that CIP plan, to me would be beneficial, Councilor Jameson, but that's just for me speaking. Because for me to get involved with this, quite honestly, I don't have the time to come up with. I know, Greg, you've raised a couple of questions concerning parks, because you're concerned about parks in the southwest part of town. How we've developed, how we've placed our parks. Do we have enough parks? I know that was a concern that you had expressed at one time too. So I think it's great information.
Right, one of the things that happens is as a rule of thumb, the developers are only going to develop in areas where there's sewer that's been installed in the ground, or water, and generally sewer first. So the private money always follows the public money. It's a good rule of thumb to know. And so when the city goes out and spends the money to do these things, they are developing the city in a growth pattern that we see as appropriate. developers run the show, really, but the city has to start it. And so there's a lot of leadership that takes place on the city's stance to give us direction. And the investment that, I don't want to go on to all this, the real purpose of this, though, really is to talk about what else do we need to know to educate the council on the CIP, and then as well, if we want to get more involved, and some of us may and some of us may not, how can we? And I think Mike's pointed out a couple of good opportunities for us. You know, there was one other aspect we talked about that brought up a lot of contention, was community involvement, public input into the whole CIP process. And the process didn't happen, public input doesn't occur until the book has been printed. And now maybe the public doesn't want to get involved, and that's okay too, I guess, but as the fiscal committee, we were trying to find a couple answers. Now, public involvement was one, community involvement, and council involvement, and a collaborative effort between the administration and the council. Those were our initiatives. That's what we were trying to get done. Our involvement prior to the CIP being printed, I think, is a major key. Would that be fair to say? And I would urge us to try to do that so that we create that ownership between us and not just take the book when it comes and say, geez, do we like it or not like it?
And if I could go back and address the public involvement, because we do, at the staff level, work with the Home Builders Association, Infrastructure Review Advisory Board. The Park Board has 3 different working committees. They work with all their partners in terms of identifying what their future needs are. You know, we've done different surveys over the years of a needs assessment that was a really good measure of public input. So there are different ways that we have used and will continue to use public input in the process. And I know that as the city keeps growing, the public is going to be even more interested in what we do or don't do in terms of priorities. And again, I think using those committees can be a way of helping to strengthen that even more.
Are there any other questions? Councilor Anderson.
Not so much a question, but just to continue what Councilman Jameson, I think the direction he was headed in. And I do agree that the council does want to try to get more involved in, you know, helping set the CIP. But I think the better way is using our committees, using UDC, you know, finding that niche. If you're talking about parks, then, you know, that's a good opportunity to meet with Don Kearney and his staff and ask the questions that need to be asked at that time as far as what the future is, what they are looking at. The park board meetings, I mean, not all of the councilmen, as the chair has stated, have that time to do it, but there's the 8 of us. And that's the nice thing about having this group, is that each one of us have different interests, and those interests should cover that CIP. You know, and I think that there is a lot of public input with Shape Sioux Falls, starting, I guess, with my interest, started with Sioux Falls Tomorrow Too, which was 100 citizens that were brought together to take a look at how our city is growing and to sort of prioritize those. And then we need to take those as a council and prioritize what our interests are in and make sure we ask those questions to make sure that we are headed in the right direction, or, you know, try to make suggestions on any changes that need to be happening. The other thing, too, we could also look at is maybe having some quarterly updates, you know, from planning on the building of the CIP in the different areas. I think your sewer and your infrastructure are pretty flat out there. You're dealing directly with developers and their needs and what they need in the outskirts of our city. But those internal parts, I think, are something that, you know, directly impacts the citizens, are something that maybe we could do more updates on to the council.
Good. I think the reports were good. I'd like to see them a little bit larger.
We'll do that.
I think we've triggered some thoughts. I think Councilor Jameson has brought up a few other thoughts here. I would suggest that we review this. If you want to have further discussion, I would suggest that we bring it forward to the chair. With that, though, I am going to have to cut this program a little bit short. We need to get on to the committee meeting here shortly. So I'll ask one more round of questions. Anything else? If not, I'll move this meeting be adjourned. 10 minutes. We'll re-adjourn at 5 after. 10 minutes.